Welcome back to the nice little weekly wrap up that Jared and I do. Jared, you have got some pretty colours on, mate. I see that Para didn't have a win over the weekend. Neither did the Bulldogs, by the way, so I might have jinxed them there. But another one of your teams.
Back to back 2 points though. We had the bye.
Yes. And Liverpool, mate, champions.
Wrapped up the title with four match days to go. Very happy household on Monday morning at 3 a.m.
Yeah, lovely. And mates, we're ending the last week in April. Time flies. Can't believe this
Absolutely.
year is a third of the way gone already.
Mm.
And school holidays, kids are back at school this week, which is great for me.
It's great
It's
for routine.
it's great for routine. I like having the
Yeah.
children at home, but sometimes they go a little bit stir crazy. The weather has been wild this last week. There's been plenty of rain going on, especially if you're in Newcastle or on the eastern seaboard. We've been getting absolutely smashed. And another thing that we've been getting smashed with is election content. And, Peter Dutton, Anthony Albanese, it's a great way to go to sleep if you ever listen to one of their election debates, because neither of them, I don't feel, have any policy or, for lack of a better sense, a backbone. So it's very hard. Listen, because they just want to accuse each other of, uh, you know, doing the wrong things. I wish that they would listen to this podcast and look long but play short, so the decision that they make could benefit us all. And I've seen an interesting stat too around this election, that it's the first time that baby boomers aren't the highest number of voters. It's actually, Gen Z and Zoomers, I think that they call them now. So uh,
Oh, is that right?
yeah, the 2000s, 90s, and 2000s babies actually outweigh the baby boomers for the first time in an election. So it'd be interesting to see how this one sways, and what that has and the implications for the next 3 years in Australia.
Like you said, it's been very lackluster, hasn't it? And a lot of the policies that have been spoken about, I don't think anybody's a real fan of especially the housing ones that we've spoken about over the last few weeks. Nothing really on the supply side for the most part, like we've said. So it will be very interesting to see what happens after Saturday.
Yeah, I think that, as we know, quite rightly, not much is going to happen. And I'm hoping for some great results, fingers crossed, because it is our country and this is where our children grow up. So, I'm hoping that we start to get on track, because there's been no doubt since COVID that everybody's taken a hit. Inflation's run through the roof. And the cost of living pressures, house prices, the supply side is not there, with increasing demand, with the level of record immigration that we've had. Not going to touch on any of these policies or anything like that, but that's probably enough of, nearly enough of politics for this episode. But we're getting closer to a rate cut,
Mm.
potentially.
Yep.
I know 2 weeks ago when we spoke that it was pricing in, the futures markets were pricing in 100% for a 50 basis point rate cut. It's now back down. We're pricing in one rate cut, and we've already had one this year. Has it really helped borrowers?
I don't know if we've really seen the full effect of it because it hasn't. We haven't seen the flow through for a long enough period of time. Inflation's obviously still heading in the right direction, which is good, which is enabling, along with what's happening across the globe, Australia to be able to make decisions like this, which is always good for clients of ours and friends of ours that have got mortgages and will put more money back in their pocket. But the full extent of it and what we'll see with the cut that's coming up in May and then potentially another one at the next meeting, probably won't see the full effect for another sort of 3 to 6 months. A lot of people that we do talk to, though, we don't actually see them pull their monthly repayment down, which is really good. So if you see the average person that takes out a 30-year loan today, a rate cut next month would cut probably about two and a bit years off the average loan. So although it's not enormous, every rate impact that we do see there is going to have a large impact over the longer period of time. And we speak often about the effects of compounding. It's also the effects of compounding when there's change in a positive direction towards you, that you maintain the status quo of where you're at as long as you're able to still do that. That extra $80 to $120 on the average $600,000 loan will shave $120,000 off a home loan over a 30-year period.
Mate, if Aussies can save a couple of years off their home loan by these rate cuts, I think that they're good. But in general, inflation, it's a little bit sticky at the moment. Are these interest rate cuts going to add to the inflation? Do you think it's a good thing?
Look, I think it's a good thing for the fact that we've gone through so many rate increases post COVID.
4 years since the
Yeah.
last rate drop. So that was COVID, obviously. So
Mm,
nearly coming up to 5 years when they were started to drop all those in
yeah.
2020.
Yeah. And obviously, the talk at that point was that we weren't going to see any rate increases until 2024, 2025.
Ha! What a lie
And,
that was.
and that started coming through at the start of 2022. So I think as Australians, with both government and RBA, they were very disillusioned at especially businesses and small businesses that took out money to keep businesses and families afloat during COVID with near zero interest rates, then getting to a point where they have to do whatever they can to keep a roof over their heads with rates that have gone up by over 4% in that period of time. They're very much looking forward to getting back down to a normal rate environment.
Yes, quite rightly with inflation, I think that we won't see the flow-on effect from the interest rate drops until, probably 6 months because there will be a lag on it. People won't really start to realise the extra cash that's hitting their bank account each month because they'll just continue paying their monthly repayments as they were. And hopefully we can start to build up a little bit of a cash buffer. First time in 4 years that we've had interest rate cuts. And laughingly, you said that, I remember back, there was going to be no interest rate rises when they were telling us until 2024. What a lie that was. The RBA, and I know, economists, they go through and they do all these lovely projections and things like that. But life throws at you some curveballs. And we've spoke about the importance of making sure that we've got the ability to, dodge these curveballs as much as possible because life gets pretty tricky. And you may even have the smartest people in Australia, if you want to call them that, economists. I've done an economics degree, so feel free to pull fun out of me as well, or pull the piss out of me. But, they're just projections and future projections. And it's very hard to get everything correct in one foul swoop in one point in time because there's lots of variabilities.
Well, it's based on the data right then as well. We wind the clock back not even a month, and the introduction of tariffs and the immediate knee-jerk reaction that happened there was no economic predictions of, the potential of 0.25% or 0.5% cut at that period of time. So it's accurate for the time that it's in right there. But like you said, the variable nature of that is the fact that there's always changes in economic markets, there's always changes in global markets, there's always changes in policies, and what that then has in terms of a flow-on effect, we've got to be aware of.
I think the biggest input to any inflation metric, though, is the energy costs. And something that I have been disappointed about in this election cycle is I remember last election cycle, Anthony Albanese saying that he was going to stand beside Australians and your energy bill was going to come down by $275, a year. What a lie that's turned out to be because energy prices are through the roof. And I can't believe that is so in Australia when we've got an abundance of coal. I think that the coal deposits that we've got in Australia are for the next 1,000 years is what we have. We live in Newcastle, very close to, a large coal mining operation. And our energy prices here should not be the price that they are. I also seen a stat that the oil that Australia pulls out of the ground as well, only or less than 10% of that gets sold in Australia. And they export 90% of the oil to and gas. They export 90% of that around the world, and only a small portion of it gets held in Australia. And our energy prices continue to go through the roof so far that manufacturing, it's just way too expensive to manufacture anything in Australia. And we are, it's our Achilles heel because nothing comes from Australia anymore. And I was at a friend's, well, not a friend of mine, a friend of my daughter's, just at a birthday party, and you get talking to the other dads, and he was an accountant for, we call it, the Steel City here in Newcastle, and he was the accountant for the steelworks here in Newcastle. It's actually cheaper now for them to get steel beams made in China and imported than what it is for them to make it due to the energy costs here in Australia. I was sort of thinking, doesn't that sound like a backwards way of manufacturing here in Australia? That we've got some of the largest coal deposits, not only an hour away with sufficient train facilities. They've got Bayswater Power Station, lots of power stations around here for coal-fired power stations. Why is our energy cost so high? I'd love to see a little bit of policy around how we can reduce that because I think that would put more money back into the pockets of Fair income, hard work, and Aussies. Sorry to go on a little bit of a tangent around energy costs.
Well, it's also the fact that our export costs, not only for coal and gas, are so cheap. There's no taxing on it in comparison with majority of other countries around the world. And you see some of the data on that. If we are going to be exporting as much as we are, we should be making top dollar on it, which we
Yes.
haven't been for a very long time.
Australia is actually the fourth largest natural resource country in the world. Behind I think it's Canada, Brazil, and Russia only have larger natural resources, so coal, iron ore, oil, gas, some of the critical elements that we need. And Australia's country, Abu Dhabi built an entire city, Dubai, in the desert from the oil money that they get and the royalties that they get off those. Why is Australia not one of the richest countries, and why is it starting to turn the other way? And I wish that there was more politicians standing up saying, this is wrong. We should be looking after ourselves. We should have the best energy policy and the cheapest energy in the world because we've got such an abundance of it.
Do we want to talk about the Jim Chalmers interview with Koshi?
I mean, there's a small little clip, and you've got to take, this with a grain of salt as well. But Jim Chalmers, who's the current treasurer for the Labor government, Koshi asked him a point blank question around, the house and the family residence that you have. There's no capital gains tax on it. Will you ever touch that? And he said, we're not looking at it, but we haven't ruled anything out either. And for me, that's just a slimy sort of way of politicians saying, this could be on the agenda. And I think that it'd be political suicide if he'd come out and said, yes, that we're going to start taxing the family home or have a capital gains tax on the family home. But just another reason why you go, why are you trying to touch something that's worked for so long? Why are you running at such a large deficit? Why aren't you balancing your own budget? Why aren't you paying your things off weekly like you should be and all your expenses? Why is there more taxes on fair income, hard work, and Aussies? So another little bee in my bonnet of late with all this election cycle, and I can't wait for it to finish.
Do you think there's anything to read into that comment?
Who knows? Who knows? Because there's also looking at the potential on additional taxes to superannuation, and we know that they've now brought in over $3 million. If you're ever lucky enough to have $3 million inside your superannuation, they want to tax that not at the 15 cents on the dollar. They want to additional taxes on that. Also, there's a potential for they're looking at self-managed super funds and just additional ways that they can gain taxes. And I'm like, I wish that they were. It's a bit like the housing policies that they've got. They're looking at one side of the equation and not the other side. And they're looking on how they can increase their revenues when they should be looking at their expenses and all the things that they're spending money on that doesn't work in Australia, rather than continuing to tax one of the highest tax nations in the world.
And especially something like capital gains on the family home, or looking at negative gearing. And there's been talk on both sides about whether that's going to continue. The majority of people that use strategies like these are hardworking Aussies. They're not billionaires. They're not the big end of town. They're teachers, they're paramedics, they're doctors, they're nurses. So it's these kind of strategies, although on the surface you'll see media push the narrative around the fact that it's to benefit the 1%. It's really not. A lot of these strategies are to benefit the mum and dad that want to do better for themselves and do better for their children, and try and set them up, pay for their educations. So it will be really interesting to see what happens there. But personally, I hope there's definitely no change at all. I think it would be political suicide, yes.
It would be political suicide. They've got franking credits. We've got, a lovely system in Australia for hardworking Aussies that's set up that way, and they should not touch it. And hopefully they don't. And hopefully this election cycle comes and goes and someone gets in there that has a long-term view and starts to rebuild Australia to what it once was, because there's no doubt that with the cost of living that things in Australia are getting worse. We're starting to feel the pinch of that, and we are the lucky country, and we should continue to be the lucky country. And I dislike all the divisiveness that politics and things have on people. It shouldn't be. We're all Aussies. We're all one. I'd love for us to work in harmony in one direction, get through this election cycle with a great leader in place that can put us in the right stead for not only the next 3 years, but for the next 30 years.
Absolutely. Now, on the election, there's both sides throwing around big numbers when it comes to policies and the ability to help Australians get into their first home. There's a lot of money chasing the same number of homes at the moment, though. So, as we've spoken about before, the key to this is the supply side of things. if we do a little summary on what policies are being thrown around, so the coalition's looking at first home buyers dipping into their super for a deposit of up to 50,000, and also the tax deductibility for first home buyers on interest capped
Bad,
up to 650.
bad.
Bad, bad. Correct. Now, Labor, the shared equity schemes, they're looking at expanding. They're also looking at the current 5% first home loan deposit scheme being expanded for certain locations. But they've also been quite bullish on their 1.2 million new home target by 2029, which has been through obviously their current term and into their next term. So, where do we see your insight on that, and who's winning the battle there?
Labor's, well, but I think all of those policies are all bad because we're all adding into the demand side. I haven't seen any of them fix the supply side. I think that, Labor's come out with the $1.2 million houses, homes that they would like to build, or houses that they would like to build. If they can achieve that target, perfect. But, how do we curb the demand side? Stop. That's the supply. That's the side that they should be looking at. All these people trying to buy houses. Where's all that demand coming from? Stop giving them more money. Stop letting them dip into supers. Stop doing all these and having the demand side of things. Get the supply side working. We've spoke about it a numerous amount of times. For me, I don't think I've seen anything that is with any common sense that actually looks at both sides of the equation. I think that my year one maths teacher would always tell me to look at both sides of the equation when you're going through certain things. So it's important to do so. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of any of the policies that they've put up. Potentially maybe the only one is the extending for certain parts the 5% first homeowner in certain scenarios, or locations where they can access it, because for up to $800,000, 5% is not getting you anything in eastern Newcastle, let alone Sydney or anywhere else up and down the eastern seaboard. So yeah,
A lot of long term negative impacts. When you're talking about withdrawing money from your super fund, the compound effect that has over your working career to get access to a deposit now is not something that we'd be looking at recommending. The mortgage deductibility up to 650,000. Yes, it's good if that helps you currently, but as a widespread problem, like we said, all that's going to do is increase the demand without increasing the supply. So it's going to bring up that bracket of first home buyers where currently their borrowing capacity is and they can get access to from lenders will go up accordingly, and everybody's going to go up accordingly, which is going to push up prices in those brackets.
I'd love to see government cut their spending instead of all of these willy-nilly policies to increase their spending on what we now know is, is the wrong policy, especially around the housing markets. Start cutting your spending and just let the natural market forces take account to it, because if there's home prices and where these home prices are, and if the builders had the ability to build more homes, they'd build more homes.
Yeah. I'd love to see some rock solid policies come out around quick approvals, more land releases, and the availability of properties to people.
Perfect. Well, hopefully next week we'll be talking about who the next Prime Minister of Australia is, and we can get past this election cycle, and we'll be on to getting an interest rate deduction down and what that does for your bank account. And from around the grounds, I know Trump and his tariffs are getting close to some deals, 90-day pause, which is nice. I think that comes out on July 8th of his 90-day pause, and we can start to get some peace and some stability back in the world.
Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap for this week. We'll look forward to tuning in next week to see what's happened with the election over the weekend. Thanks very much for tuning in, and hope you have a great rest of the week.